woman was God's second mistake. This sentence feels like an emotional bomb, but behind it there is not only emotion, there is philosophy. This saying feels like it came from Nietzsche, but in fact, before Nietzsche ever said anything like this, there was already someone who had thought this way. He did not sweeten life. He believed love was a deception, and that woman was nature's most powerful weapon. It may be a painful story, but we are not here to condemn uncomfortable ideas. We are here to understand where these ideas came from and why they still feel real to so many men today. This video will guide you deep into the mind of one man who believed life itself was hostile and that romantic love was one of the most dangerous illusions. It will not be an easy journey, but perhaps it is a necessary one. Welcome to the mirror that reflects your inner self. No matter how uncomfortable it is, let us explore the truth. Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher without illusions. Schopenhauer was not a thinker who tried to make people feel good. He did not beautify anything. He did not say what people wanted to hear. He spoke the truth, a very hard and uncomfortable kind of truth. He believed life was not fair, not peaceful, and not logical. According to Schopenhauer, life is ruled by something far deeper than reason or morality, a blind, invisible force living inside all of us. He called it the will. But this is not willpower as you imagine it. It is not something you can control. This will is not personal or emotional. It is a natural force that exists in all living beings. From the smallest insect to the most intelligent human, the will is always operating, and it has only one goal: to preserve life, survive, grow, and reproduce. The will does not care whether you are happy. It does not care whether you suffer. It has no interest in love, success, or morality. It only wants life to continue endlessly. Humans as tools of the will. Here is the painful part. Schopenhauer believed that whether man or woman, humans are merely tools used by the will. We think we are free. We think we choose our careers, choose our partners, choose our dreams. But the truth is, we are being pulled by the will like puppets hanging on invisible strings. Our strongest emotions, love, anger, desire, are not fully ours. They are strategies used by the will to keep life going. Men and women may look like they are making choices, but often they are merely acting out a deeper plan of nature. Once you understand this idea that life exists not for your joy but for survival, everything else, Schopenhauer says, begins to make dark, painful sense. Why we are never satisfied, why desire never ends, the endless cycle of suffering. Schopenhauer believed we are never truly free. We like to think we control our lives, choose what we want, choose whom we love. But deep inside, something is pulling us. The will. This invisible force inside us is always working, always pushing. It is not loud, it is not logical, but it never stops. It makes us want something, and the moment we get it, it makes us want something else. Schopenhauer said life moves like a clock between two painful states, suffering and boredom. When you don't have something, you suffer, you crave it, you chase it. You think, if I just get this, I will finally be happy. But once you get it, you feel good only for a moment. Soon the feeling fades. You get used to it. You get bored. Then you want something new, and the chase begins again. This cycle, desire, suffering, satisfaction, boredom, new desire, never ends. And this is exactly what the will wants. As long as you keep running, moving, chasing, you help life continue. The will does not care if you are miserable or exhausted. It only wants you to keep desiring, working, and surviving. Love under the will. Now imagine this in the context of relationships. You fall in love. It feels magical, passionate, overwhelming. But over time, the passion fades. You begin to see flaws. You feel restless. You may start wanting someone new. That too is the will. Not because you are broken, but because something larger is using you. Understanding this is painful, but it explains why satisfaction never lasts and why endless pursuit only leads to more suffering. Woman as the pure agent of the will. So how does this connect to women? According to Schopenhauer, woman is not merely an individual, she is the purest and most direct instrument of the will, not because she is evil, not because she chooses it consciously, but because nature made her that way. Her body, emotions, instincts, all are shaped by the will's goal to preserve life and continue the species. Unlike men who chase ideas, dreams, and higher meaning, women naturally remain grounded in reality. They focus on survival essentials: home, children, safety, comfort, stability. This does not mean women are shallow or weak. That is not what Schopenhauer meant. He believed women's power is practical, emotional, and instinctive. They are not designed to chase abstract truth, but to protect life and ensure its continuation. In his view, this was not an insult, but a metaphysical fact. Women were guardians of nature, a bridge between the will and the real world. Their instincts are perfectly suited for nurturing, maintaining homes, and managing daily survival. If they show little interest in grand ideas or eternal truths, it is not because they cannot, but because the will gave them a different task. Schopenhauer said, "Woman exists naturally for family and reproduction. She is the will's most perfect creation." That is why he believed women do not resist the will. They are the will in its most natural form. And for this reason, they possess immense invisible power, biological influence, emotional attraction, and survival instinct. Man is the one who can resist. So where does man stand? According to Schopenhauer, man is different. He is not just another tool of nature. He is the only being who can say no to the will. While woman follows the will naturally, man can resist it. He can deny instinct. He can suffer for things without survival value. He can fight and die for honor, truth, beauty. He can spend years writing a book no one asked for. He can paint art the world doesn't understand. He can abandon comfort for vision and meaning. Schopenhauer said this was man's greatest strength and his greatest curse. Because once a man realizes he has been used by the will his entire life, he begins to question everything. He stops blindly following desire. He asks, "Why do I want this? Is this really me or the will controlling me?" That moment of awareness, that is when a man becomes dangerous, because now he can choose something higher. He can create, he can rebel, he can live for meaning beyond survival. Women live for life, men can live for meaning, but this freedom has a price. Resisting the will brings loneliness, alienation, and unbearable clarity. Yet to Schopenhauer, this was what made man capable of greatness, not strength, but the ability to refuse. Romantic love as a biological trap. Now let us talk about romantic love. The thing we are taught is the most beautiful part of life. Schopenhauer believed it was one of the greatest lies. Romantic love is a trap, a deception used by nature for reproduction. It feels personal. It feels destined. But behind the butterflies, the will is working. You are not choosing. The will is choosing through you. Men are drawn to youth and beauty because those signal fertility. Women are drawn to power and security because they signal protection, not preference. Design, poetry, soulmates, passion, they are costumes. Nature disguises biology as spirituality, and once reproduction succeeds, the illusion fades, passion dies. What remains is responsibility. The will got what it wanted. Marriage and fear. This is why Schopenhauer feared marriage. Not because he hated women, but because marriage meant submission to the will. Men think they follow love. In truth, they surrender their mission. This belief was personal. Behind his philosophy was a wounded son. The mother wound Johanna Schopenhauer was intelligent, famous, admired, but to her son she was cold and distant. Their relationship was war. And that pain shaped his worldview. His philosophy was not born in peace, but in emotional deprivation. What many call misogyny may have been fear. Fear of how deeply women could control a man's heart. Schopenhauer's warning to men is clear. Do not blindly trust your strongest emotions. Ask yourself first, is this truly mine or am I being used? This is not about hating women, it is about knowing yourself. A woman can walk beside you, but she must never become your purpose. The story does not end with rejection, bitterness, or retreat. That would be too simple, and Schopenhauer was never interested in simple conclusions. Once a man sees the machinery behind desire, once he recognizes the will operating beneath his thoughts and emotions, he stands at a crossroads. Awareness alone does not free him. In fact, awareness often deepens the suffering. The illusion is gone, but the pull remains. The will does not disappear just because it has been named. It continues to whisper, to tempt, to stir longing. The difference is that now the man hears it as a voice rather than mistaking it for his own soul. This is where Schopenhauer believed most men fail. They mistake insight for liberation. They think that seeing the trap means they have escaped it, but insight without discipline is only another form of vanity. The will is patient. It waits. It reappears in subtler forms: nostalgia, loneliness, the desire to be understood, the hunger for admiration. Even the wish to be above desire can become a desire itself. The man who prides himself on being detached can be just as enslaved as the man who chases pleasure, only in a more sophisticated way. Schopenhauer argued that the true struggle begins after awakening. To see clearly is painful because it strips life of its comforting narratives. Love is no longer sacred, success is no longer meaningful, and happiness reveals itself as temporary anesthesia rather than a final state. Many men, when confronted with this emptiness, rush back into illusion. They call it hope, they call it optimism. But in Schopenhauer's eyes, it is surrender. It is the will reclaiming control by offering warmth in exchange for obedience. So what remains if one does not retreat? Schopenhauer's answer was unsettling: renunciation, not as weakness but as strength. Not hatred of life, but refusal to be ruled by it. He believed that the highest form of freedom was not choice, but non-attachment. To want less, to desire less, to stop demanding that life provide meaning, pleasure, or validation. This is not a joyful doctrine. It is a sober one. It asks the man to stand upright in a world that offers no guarantees and no final rewards. In this state, relationships change. A man no longer seeks a woman to complete him, rescue him from loneliness, or give his life significance. He approaches her without illusion. He does not project destiny onto her face or imagine salvation in her affection. He sees her clearly, as another being shaped by the same blind force, navigating the same cycle of desire and dissatisfaction. This clarity does not destroy tenderness, it purifies it. What remains is not obsession, but respect, not dependence, but measured closeness. Schopenhauer did not believe most men were capable of this. He thought the majority would always choose comfort over truth, that they would rather be ruled than be alone, that they would rather suffer meaningfully than endure emptiness honestly. And he may have been right. Even today, men are encouraged to define themselves through conquest, romance, validation, and attention. The language has changed, but the mechanism is the same. The will adapts to culture. It always has. The man who resists becomes difficult to place. He is not driven by ambition in the usual sense, yet he is not lazy. He is not romantic, yet he is not cruel. He works, creates, thinks, but without the feverish urgency of someone chasing fulfillment. His actions are quieter, slower, and often misunderstood. Others may call him cold, detached, or broken. In reality, he is simply no longer bargaining with life. He gives effort without expecting happiness as payment. This does not mean withdrawal from the world. Schopenhauer was not advocating isolation for its own sake. He believed art, philosophy, and contemplation offered temporary release from the will. In moments of deep thought, music, or creation, desire pauses. The endless inner noise quiets. For a brief time, the man is no longer chasing or fearing. He is simply observing. These moments do not save him, but they remind him that the will is not absolute. It can be interrupted. Over time, this interruption changes a man's posture toward existence. He becomes less reactive, insults sting less, praise excites him less, loss no longer feels like annihilation, pleasure no longer feels like proof of worth. This emotional flattening is often mistaken for depression, but it is something else entirely. It is emotional sovereignty. The man is no longer being dragged violently between craving and disappointment. He still feels, but he is not ruled. This is where Schopenhauer diverges sharply from modern self-help optimism. He did not believe life could be engineered into happiness. He did not believe in manifesting desire or aligning with the universe. He believed suffering was built into existence itself. The goal, therefore, was not to eliminate suffering, but to stop feeding it unnecessarily, to stop inflaming desire with stories, fantasies, and expectations that only tighten the chain. For men who reach this stage, relationships become optional rather than essential. Love may happen, but it is no longer worshipped. Sex may occur, but it is no longer mistaken for transcendence. A woman may be loved deeply, but she is not asked to carry the impossible burden of providing meaning. This is not indifference, it is fairness. It allows both people to exist without distortion. Schopenhauer understood that this path is lonely, not because it rejects people, but because it rejects illusions that bind people together. Shared fantasies are powerful social glue. When a man no longer participates in them, he feels separated, even among others. But this loneliness, in Schopenhauer's view, was cleaner than the crowded loneliness of those surrounded by others yet perpetually unfulfilled. The final irony is this: once a man stops chasing fulfillment, he often appears more grounded, more composed, even more attractive. Not because he is trying, but because desperation has left him. The will loses one of its favorite leverage points. He no longer needs to be seen, chosen, or desired to feel whole. This makes him unpredictable, and what cannot be easily predicted cannot be easily controlled. Schopenhauer did not promise peace. He promised clarity. He did not offer salvation. He offered honesty. His philosophy does not lead upward toward hope, but inward toward understanding. It strips life down to its raw mechanics and asks a single question: knowing what you now know, how will you live? Most will return to sleep, some will become bitter, a few will harden themselves against feeling, but the rare man will learn to stand in the tension without fleeing. He will accept desire without obeying it, acknowledge pain without dramatizing it, and continue forward without illusions of reward. That, for Schopenhauer, was the closest thing to freedom a human being could reach. The man who continues beyond clarity enters a phase that few talk about because it cannot be packaged as motivation or sold as hope. Once illusions are stripped away and the will is no longer mistaken for destiny, something quiet but heavy settles in. It is not despair, but it is not comfort either. It is the recognition that life does not owe coherence, fairness, or meaning. This realization does not crush him in one dramatic moment. It erodes him slowly, like water wearing down stone. The old reflexes still appear: desire, jealousy, longing, but they no longer arrive with promises. They come as signals, stripped of poetry. He observes them rise and fall, and in doing so he begins to understand how little of what once ruled him was ever personal. At this stage, memory becomes a battlefield. Past relationships replay themselves in his mind, but now without the emotional fog that once softened them. Moments that once felt romantic now reveal their transactional nature. Conflicts once blamed on fate or incompatibility expose their roots in unmet expectations and unconscious bargaining. He sees how often he mistook intensity for depth and attention for connection. This retrospective clarity is brutal because it leaves no room for self-deception. He was not unlucky, he was obedient. He followed scripts written by biology, culture, and fear of emptiness. This understanding stings more than heartbreak ever did. Yet something else begins to happen. Without the constant hunger for validation, his internal world becomes less noisy. Silence, once terrifying, turns neutral. He no longer rushes to fill it with distraction, conversation, or affection. This is not because he has transcended need, but because he no longer confuses need with identity. Loneliness still visits, but it is recognized as a condition, not a verdict. It passes, like weather. This alone places him outside the psychological economy that governs most people, where attention is currency and intimacy is leverage. His relationship with women shifts again, more subtly this time. He no longer divides them into ideals or threats. He stops assigning them symbolic roles: muse, temptress, savior, destroyer. They become individuals again, flawed, complex, constrained by their own compulsions. He notices how often they are trapped by the same forces he once resented in them. The will does not favor, it uses. In this recognition, resentment dissolves. What remains is distance without contempt. He does not need to dominate, impress, or withdraw. He can simply engage or not engage without narrative. This distance often reads as emotional unavailability to others, but internally it feels like alignment. He is no longer performing masculinity for approval or molding himself to be chosen. His actions begin to originate from coherence rather than reaction. He works not to be admired, but because work structures his mind. He trains his body not to attract, but to maintain discipline. He learns not to escape pain, but to reduce unnecessary suffering. These choices look ordinary from the outside, but they are anchored in refusal, the refusal to let unconscious desire dictate direction. Over time, he becomes acutely aware of how modern society amplifies the will rather than restraining it. Endless stimulation, comparison, sexualization, and moral confusion are not accidents. They are accelerants. The more restless people become, the more they consume, seek, attach, and submit. He sees how even rebellion is often pre-packaged, how identity itself has become a marketplace. This does not turn him into a cynic shouting from the sidelines. It makes him precise. He chooses carefully where to invest attention, knowing that attention feeds whatever it touches. Love, if it appears again, enters under different conditions. It is slower, less theatrical. It does not demand sacrifice of purpose or erosion of boundaries. There is affection without fusion, closeness without collapse. He does not promise eternity, nor does he seek it. He understands that permanence is not a property of emotion. If the bond ends, it ends without existential ruin. Grief still exists, but it is proportional. It does not devour the self. This form of love is rarer, not because it is superior, but because it requires two people who are no longer bargaining with emptiness. There are moments when the old longing returns with force. Youth, beauty, intensity still trigger something deep and ancient. Schopenhauer never denied this. The will cannot be erased. The difference now is response. Desire no longer commands action automatically. It is weighed. Sometimes it is indulged knowingly, without delusion. Sometimes it is refused without self-punishment. The man stops moralizing his impulses. He simply refuses to let them define him. This neutrality is powerful. It removes shame and pride from the same equation. As years pass, his sense of time changes. Urgency dissolves. The pressure to arrive somewhere, career peak, perfect relationship, fulfilled self loses credibility. He understands that life is not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be managed. This does not make him passive, it makes him strategic. He invests in what compounds inwardly: clarity, competence, health, skill. External wins are welcomed but not worshipped. Losses are registered but not inflated. What surprises him most is how this stance alters power dynamics. People accustomed to emotional negotiation find him unreadable. He does not chase, plead, or retaliate. He can walk away without drama. This unsettles those who rely on leverage. He becomes difficult to manipulate because he does not need outcomes to justify his worth. This is not arrogance. It is independence at the psychological level, where control usually operates. There is a cost. He will never experience the intoxicating highs of blind romantic surrender again. The euphoric madness of believing another person will save him is gone. Some would call this a tragedy. Schopenhauer would call it maturity. The man trades intensity for stability, illusion for awareness. He lives with less color, perhaps, but also with fewer wounds. The highs were always paired with crashes. He no longer accepts the deal. In solitude, he reflects on how rare this path is. Most people do not want truth. They want reassurance. They want stories that justify their suffering and promise reward. To live without such stories requires internal structure. It requires values that are not borrowed, desires that are examined, and boundaries that are enforced quietly. This is why so few sustain it. It offers no applause. And yet, there is a strange peace in this refusal. Not happiness, but equilibrium. The man is no longer at war with himself. He no longer oscillates between hope and disappointment. He understands the rules of the game well enough to stop confusing participation with victory. Life continues. Desire continues. Loss continues. But they pass through him rather than owning him. Schopenhauer never claimed this path would save the world or even make it better. He was not interested in progress. He was interested in truth, and the truth, as he saw it, was that freedom is not found in fulfilling desire, but in loosening its grip. Not in being loved, but in no longer needing to be. Not in escaping suffering, but in refusing to multiply it through illusion. The man who accepts this does not become superior. He becomes lighter. Not because life is easier, but because he is no longer dragging fantasies behind him. He moves forward carrying only what is real, his actions, his awareness, and the quiet responsibility of choosing consciously in a world that profits from unconsciousness.